Do you wonder what treatments physicians use and prescribe today that will one day be perceived as outdated with the lens and perspective of the future? Who here has heard of Ignaz Semmelweis? Semmelweis was a German-Hungarian scientist and physician in the 1840s who maintained some pretty controversial theories and ideas for his era. His wild idea that microscopic organisms, unseen by the naked eye, could serve as the source of spreading infection. He was committed to an insane asylum by his colleagues for his radical ideas, where he was beaten and ultimately died before Louis Pasteur was able to confirm germ theory shortly thereafter. Now, we are all well aware how hand washing and sterilization techniques can limit the spread of infection. It begs the question, what sorts of treatments and medical discoveries exist today that are being dismissed and overlooked? What sorts of treatments do we currently accept as appropriate that will one day be rendered ineffective or even harmful? With current and modern perspective, many medical treatments of the past seem primitive, and in some cases, even barbaric. From the Neolithic era, trepanation was an act of drilling a hole in the skull, exposing the brain to air so that evil spirits could escape. 5 centuries ago, barbers were serving as surgeons performing bloodletting, for which the well-recognized red and white barber pole that we see today derives its symbolism, representing blood and bandages. As recent as the 1940s, lobotomies were considered cutting-edge treatment for mental illness, in which the founding physician earned a Nobel Prize. This was a procedure in which an ice pick was inserted into the eye socket with the aid of a hammer to separate connections in the brain. Early in my career as a neurologist, I was struck by how common it is for patients to present with functional symptoms of disease without any clear underlying cause to suggest a diagnosis. I will consult with patients complaining of weakness, numbness, vision changes, difficulty walking, and complex pain syndromes. Yet the batteries of testing, dedicated neuroimaging, and even spinal taps all result as normal. There is a phenomenon well published in the medical literature called conversion, in which if a patient suffers and then suppresses emotional, sexual, or otherwise mental trauma, that real physical symptoms can manifest out of the control of the affected individual. It is often that these patients' symptoms will improve with talk therapy and antidepressant medication, rather than providing them antibiotics or subjecting them to unnecessary surgeries. Thoughts are powerful. They can serve as the seed and root of many of our problems, and ironically, may have the potential to serve as the cure. Is electroconvulsive therapy, essentially electrocution, really the best option we have at our disposal for tough-to-treat depression? Is there any other instance in medicine outside of the psychiatry realm where we invite the patient to commit to months and years of a particular treatment plan, with only some having complete resolution and healing from that trauma? That standard isn't acceptable when we think about treating and promoting healing for a physical wound or injury, and yet we expect psychiatric patients to commit to years of cognitive behavioral therapy in the hopes that benefit is obtained. Talk therapy has been proven to break bad patterns of thought that lead to problems and learn new ways of thinking to solve problems and promote healing. But progress is slow. Imagine if we could harness the power of cognitive behavioral therapy, but accelerate the process and expedite results. As a doctor, I find it puzzling that modern medicine separates neurology and psychiatry into separate disciplines as if the brain is not one organ. We've learned so much about the body and other organ systems, and yet the brain serves as the final frontier. What will it take for society to consider mental health as a part of whole health? There's a new treatment avenue currently gaining a lot of attention, with tons of novel dedicated research starting to enter the mainstream. Some perceive this medicine as controversial, while others regard it as pioneering. Regardless of where you stand with your initial impressions or preconceived notions, there is mounting evidence to support this group of therapeutics as having profound and long-lasting benefits for our mental health. Let's talk about psychedelics. It was during World War II in Basel, Switzerland, when Alfred Hofmann, the chemist who synthesized LSD in his lab, imbibed a dose to experience the first proverbial acid trip. LSD is chemically very similar to the serotonin molecule, the feel-good hormone. In the coming years, scientists would discover similar compounds that exist within nature, such as mescaline in the peyote cactus, and DMT found within tropical plants used in the psychoactive drink ayahuasca. It was 10 years from Hofmann's discovery that R. Gordon Wasson identified strains of psilocybin in the mountains of Mexico that would be recognized as the active chemical in magic mushrooms. These compounds, when ingested, can have effects on our brain for anywhere between 3 to 12 hours, depending on the drug and dose. It wouldn't be until the 1960s that psychology researchers at Harvard, Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, would establish the foundation for psychedelics as potential treatment for mental health disease states. With the backdrop of the Vietnam War and widespread anti-war protests, Richard Nixon deemed psychedelics to be part of a counterculture movement that was a threat to his administration. That forced all research investigating psychedelics to shut down, rendering mescaline, psilocybin, DMT, and LSD as illegal Schedule I drugs. It wasn't until 2006 that Roland Griffiths and his colleagues at the Johns Hopkins University penned the seminal paper titled "Psilocybin Can Occasion Mystical-Type Experiences, Having Substantial and Sustained Personal Meaning and Spiritual Significance." That is quite a provocative title for medical literature standards, and reignited an entire field of study devoted to investigating a group of restricted therapeutics in the psychedelics class. From this point forward, what was once considered taboo may now serve as one of the most promising and impactful methods of treatment for mental health disease states. Novel safety data has demonstrated that psychedelics, contrary to 1960s reports, do not carry toxicity nor lead to physical dependence. In Griffith's study, he and his colleagues recruited a group of healthy volunteers to ingest 1 dose of psilocybin. From this study, the majority of participants enrolled rated their experience a year later as being among one of the most spiritually significant or personally meaningful experiences in their entire lifetime. People were able to change their perceptions and create powerful new ways of thinking. An important and interesting discovery was regarding intention. In the psychedelic experience, the journey is heavily influenced by set and setting. That is, one's mindset and the physical setting that they are in. For this reason, it is often that there is a shaman or a guide to assist with the curation of the psychedelic experience. Ground control, so to speak. Guides will often provide music and encourage the use of blindfolds to minimize external stimuli and allow the patient to turn their focus inward. Since the Hopkins study, researchers at some of the most preeminent academic institutions in the world are now researching and studying psychedelics. Oxford, NYU, Harvard Mass General, Baylor, UCSF, and Johns Hopkins are just some of these institutions looking at MDMA, the active component in ecstasy, as well as psilocybin, DMT, and LSD as potential treatments for states of anxiety, addiction, depression, and PTSD. Quite dissimilar from the way in which these drugs were used in the 60s and 70s, there is now a more targeted approach and a way in which to offer these medications in a controlled clinical setting. In one study, psilocybin helped 2/3 of smokers enrolled quit smoking cigarettes for at least a year. That is the most successful smoking cessation treatment ever studied. In 2014, a network was identified in the brain as the default mode network. These regions make up what psychologists refer to as the ego, or sense of self. These interconnected areas are very active in states of anxiety and depression, yet temporarily are inhibited when under the influence of psychedelics. A dedicated meditation practice can also tap into and inhibit the default mode network, in which mindfulness allows for personal discovery and promotes growth. Think of your mind as a snow-covered hill in which your thoughts are sleds. Over time, the grooves are dug deeper and deeper, making it difficult to escape the paths that are created. These paths are representative of our internal dialogue, which then become ingrained. Psychedelics allow for a fresh mound of snow, so to speak, to be laid, so that new paths, thoughts, connections, and interpretations can be made. Perhaps this is the reason why psychedelics are so effective at treating the ruminating thoughts that are commonly seen in states of anxiety, addiction, and depression. Imagine if we could harness the power of our thoughts to promote healing, rather than allowing them to instill harm. Please join me in raising your hand if you have suffered anxiety or depression in your own life. Integration is a critical component to maximizing the potential benefit garnered by the psychedelic experience. Once consciousness returns to its baseline state, the patient must work to understand and interpret what was encountered on the journey. The real homework starts then to try to apply what was learned and discovered to day-to-day life. The preliminary results from these drugs are fascinating, and that the effects from just one dose can be so profound and long-lasting. Patients are given an opportunity to have an experience in which their mind is open to possibility, the chance to work through a prior trauma, or see something with new light. That is very different from the current standard of care for treating mental health, which implements daily medication regimens and necessitates years of intense cognitive behavioral therapy. There is still much work to be done. These medications are not without risk and are not for everyone. Certain screening measures should be put into place to identify those who may be at risk for schizophrenia and other psychotic illnesses. As these drugs are powerful, they can also be dangerous, sending some off into the metaphorical deep end. There is also the real risk of interaction and harm if the patient is taking other medications that affect the serotonin system. For these reasons, we must encourage continued research to test proper dosing and to compare to the current standard of care. Can anyone guess the single biggest inhibitor to progress with psychedelics? I'll give you a clue. It's the same reason why progress in all areas of mental health and substance use have been slower compared to other areas of medicine. It's also the same reason why some of you who may suffer from anxiety or depression didn't raise your hand when I just asked. Judgment. Progress has been forced underground. As the current medical, legal, and pharmaceutical industrial complex considers psychedelics as treatment, there is a new space outpacing the legacy system for discussion, debate, and approval. Has anyone here heard of Web3 and the metaverse? With blockchain technology and NFTs, people are connecting behind anonymous avatars to build community through collections of art, technologically secure internet connections, and shared interests. NFTs like Psychedelics Anonymous is one such collection that attracts therapists, psychiatrists, mental health coaches, and other areas of expertise to collaborate anonymously to discuss the current state of psychedelics without boundaries of border or being constrained by the threat of perception. What does it say about our society that researchers, scientists, and physicians are using avatars for fear of reprisal if they are open about what they are advocating for? How would you perceive your doctor if you knew that they had suffered from depression? How would your perceptions change if you knew that your physician had experienced psychedelics in their personal life? Clearly, there is still taboo due to controversy and perception in the media dating back to Nixon's war on drugs. We are still in the nascency of understanding how the brain works. It is my hope that what is being fostered by Psychedelics Anonymous to shape perception, and through the scientific discoveries and evidence garnered by research at Johns Hopkins and the like, that we do change the way in which we think about mental health. What would the world look like if we didn't force the best minds underground with their best ideas? Why do so many brilliant people only feel safe to discuss psychedelics behind a mask for fear of retribution by their colleagues and by society at large? Semmelweis was brave, for he voiced his opinions and shared his theories openly and advocated for what he believed in, despite it being unpopular at the time. For this, he paid the ultimate price. Job ain't finished. Judgment is real. Our internal dialogue and preconceived notion can be difficult to break and change. But there is a blizzard coming, and now we have an opportunity to lay some fresh tracks, because thoughts are powerful. Thank you.